Okay, I'm afraid we're going to quick hit this. This is Facts in 5. It's another 3M bookcase game. This one's one the reason I can do this one, like with Quinto, this one I managed to pick up at a Goodwill or something like that. It's just $3 or something. Less than it would cost me to ship it here. It's more beat up than my other version, but, you know, I figured, well, this is a game I really love, and I wanted to cover it. One thing I'm missing with my set is, I guess there's a rule book that comes with it, rather than merely this, I think. I seem to remember there was a rule book. Oh, wait. I've actually got it in here. How about that? Alright. Well, I suppose I ought to have read the rules if I knew this. But, I'll fake it. Not too different from what I usually do, right? Okay. So, this is a game very much like a later game that came out, very derived on it, Scattergories. However, Scattergories was designed for children. This one is designed not for children. It's not that it has adult subject matter or anything necessarily, but instead of giving you a chart of lollipop flavors, colors, and stuff like that, what you end up doing is a little different. Basically, you're going to play this in a series of 5 rounds, although that can be variable as well. And in each round, you're going to select a set of cards, 5 cards, and a set of initial letters, and create a grid where players are going to be trying to generate words which fit, and it's usually going to be proper nouns, but we'll see. The different categories sometimes aren't. Words which fit the categories as defined and are based on the particular letters drawn along here. So how is the game actually played? Well, if I recall correctly, you just draw cards as you go. You could, of course, play it a little differently, where, where different options to the cards are taken. For example, players could be given a hand of cards to play from, for example. But the basic rule is someone, the first player, draws a card, and it's listed with a class, in this case authors and poets, and then a category. And the player has the option to either just leave it as a class card and write that class, and that makes it a more general topic. Authors and poets, well, geez, I'd like to be able to do many different types. Or one could pick specific categories within that. For example, in this case, fictional authors and poets, or Western authors and poets. In general, these cards that are already fixed in terms of categories are fairly reasonable. Instead, however, there are these, well, there are choice cards here, which are not terribly easy. These only allow you to pick a class, but, well, oh no, this one only allows you to pick a class. But these, for example, would allow more specifics within a class. So you'd have a choice between many different classes, giving you more variance. So you could like take mythological names, and then you could go to something that's more difficult that you think will be harder for other players. But again, the card kind of limits you to what you get to choose. You could choose gods or goddesses, which is actually pretty general, or you could choose one of these 4 different genres of mythological names. So anyway, what's going to happen is each player draws one of these in order until you've gotten 5 of them. And those have all been picked, and the categories, if the player wishes, can be used for specialization. Now we have one here, for example, American writers, and then you can do of option descent, where you can, you know, you could say of Hispanic descent, but you could also make some of these very, very difficult. So, for example, past American writers of Taiwanese descent. There aren't going to be a lot of those. And that's a way, if you're not comfortable with the general class, that you might be able to hose that whole class by picking a more specific category. I can remember one where we did something similar, female tennis stars, I think it was, and I think we chose Rhodesian descent, or female Rhodesian tennis stars. There are none, so nobody could get any points for that. Okay, the next thing that happens is a bunch of letters are picked, and again, 5 of these will be picked. So players order their categories, and then we just randomly pick some letters, and for the most part, these will just be written down in this direction. Each player has their own play card for each round. Now, obviously, you're going to run out of sheets very quickly for that, so we used a lot of erasing or whatever. But those are going to be the first letter of their sort of most well-known name. Now, most well-known name, this is a problem another 3M game, Image, kind of has. Hey, how do you restrict the name? So, for example, Henry the 8th. Is he an H for Henry, or is he a T for Henry Tudor? What are you going to do there? Again, players have to kind of come to a decision beforehand what they're going to pick there. We do have some wild cards, which are little asterisks. There's one. Which allow you to pick any letter you like. I don't think you can repeat the same name twice if you happen to have 2 of the same letter. So then each player is going to be timed, well, everybody's going to be timed, and you use this little egg timer or whatever, you flip it over, well, you wait till it's completely done, you flip it over, and you have however much time it takes for the sand to run out. And of course, like any kind of mechanical instrument, these sometimes don't work well, and this one appears to be somewhat broken. I don't think it's actually working. But my other version, the egg timer, works perfectly fine. Well, no, it's going. It's just very slow. Okay, and you have so much time, and once somebody notices that the time is up, they slap the table or whatever and say, hey, time's up, you gotta stop. And if you're in the middle of writing a word, well, you finish it or whatever. But so each player is going to be picking for each of these categories, and you can see here's someone's here. What is this? This can't be my writing, it's probably readable, but like outlaws. Yeah, this isn't even my group. For P, they picked Bonnie Parker. They were probably being specific with the last names there. Political statesmen, politicians, American for the category. And then with W, they took George Washington. And with C, they took Bill Clinton. Well, maybe not. It looks more like bitch Clinton. But okay. Anyway, whatever rules you want to put on how these names are formed, a lot of them are going to be people, but not all of them. So for example, product, let's see if I've got others here. They don't always end up as people, although a lot of them are athletes, leaders or rulers, military figures, fictional characters, TV programs. And so here's C, Charlie's Angels, U, upstairs, downstairs, whatever. So when something's a category that you're very, very good at, you can rack up, you know, words in every single letter for that fairly easily, right? And if something's an easy letter, you might find yourself able to fill that letter fairly easily. Of course, if you have a Q, it might be difficult. Okay, fair enough. And you can see here where people have chosen not to take the category. And in fact, that's one of the handicap rules. If you're playing with adults and children, let the children play with just the class, but make all the adults take a category, play with the category, and each player who draws a card must pick a category in order to penalize the adults there. It's a nice little factor there. Okay, so how do you score this sucker? Well, after the time limit goes and somebody notices it, what you do is you put little marks in here for each space that you get right. And what you're going to get is the square of the number of successes you get in each column and each row. What that means is it's best to specialize. If you can specialize in a letter, well, getting 5 across in that letter will be worth 25 points. Whereas if you scattered your 5 down a diagonal, for example, which doesn't get multiplied at all, you'd only get 5 points in each direction. Okay, but if you're going across in a row, that means you're only going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points in the column, in the sum of the columns, because 1 squared is going to be 1, right? All right, and then you sum up the column and row scores, and you add them together, and they become your general score. They get added together and simply summed up here, and this is from my game. And I got a lot of points, and my wife did not. Very, very simple situation. Very simple game. However, this is probably my favorite of all the sort of trivia type games, just because of the control that you have. We'll talk a little bit more about it in some FaceTime, I guess, because everybody wants to see what clothing I decide to pull off the floor. Alright. Facts in 5 again. Well, this happens to be one of my very favorite of all the trivia games that I have. And I kind of like trivia games. But if you've played a lot of Trivial Pursuit, for example, or many of the others, you get to learn what the cards are, what the questions are. And that ends up, you memorize what answers there are to trivia games. It's accidental. You don't intend to do it, but it just happens. In this game, it doesn't just happen, because the cards are, first of all, there are quite a few. You use 25 of them, but there's also a lot of choice within a lot of the cards. Every card gives the player who draws it some ability to choose what to do. So you can pick to your own strengths, you can pick to hit weaknesses in your opponents. If you're not sure what's going on, if you feel like it's a weak card for you, you can usually bone the card so it's not worth anything as a play. So there kind of aren't too many bad draws in this game. And there are fairly wild cards where you're allowed to call your own, too, where you can play directly to your strength entirely. Then on top of that, you have this randomization of these letters, which allows you, this humongous variance. Clearly, if you pick a category you know well, and there are a lot of names in it, so for example, if you're really a fan of sports, you can probably pick a specific sport and be able to fill a letter fill any letter that you get. Likewise with most topics, really. But there are some class category combinations that is going to be damn hard to get any points in, and to tell you the truth, you probably end up just ignoring that because it's not worth gathering, it's not worth spending. You have very limited time on this thing. I think you have about 3 minutes. That's what an egg timer would be, and I think this is probably a standard egg timer rather than them trying to aim for something specific. Component-wise, cards are good style poker cards. This is pretty standard for 3M games. I love the 3M game delivery system. With the bookcase games, or bookshelf games, with the some of their other designs for delivering the game, I'm a little less pleased, but these just look so beautiful on the shelf. You have your little tray that holds everything. That's helpful, I guess, but it also is kind of attractive. The egg timer's fine. I have a couple of little complaints. These guys are kind of sharp. If you put them in a bag and reach in, you end up kind of cutting your hands on them, which is weird. They're made out of plastic rather than cardboard or something like that. But they're, sturdy as hell. The play card sheets, you have as many of these as you do these score sheets. Now the master score sheets, well, you use 1/5 as many of them as you do the play cards, so it's kind of an issue. These guys are going to run out pretty quickly. The rulebook is actually pretty good. This is not a terribly complicated game, although some players might have trouble understanding how you score. I think I kind of had to look at the example to understand that was the case. So they say theoretically a player could score 250 points per round. Yeah, that's right. I think I had to actually read the example to understand how this was supposed to be scored, which is a little different. It also doesn't fit in perfectly well, which is why I guess it was crushed in the bottom of the box. I didn't even know it was there. So, there are a few factors to this. of why I really like it. Many trivia games don't allow for much. You draw a card, and hey, do you know it or not? Trivial Pursuit is the obvious example of that. There's not a lot you can do there. And you can memorize those cards. Here, there's more variance in terms of what you're going to pick up, etc. There's no way to really own the game except to know everything that could come up, right? You have to be solid in every category that could possibly come up. You have to also kind of know your opponents to be able to pick the things that you have an advantage in. In some cases, you might be looking at, hey, I want to be able to run the board on something rather than shut somebody down completely. So you can pick a category you're very strong at, even if somebody else is fairly strong, with the hopes that you can do better than them on it once the letters come up. What is against it? Nothing, really. Honestly, I think this is a near-perfect game for a trivia type game, for a pure trivia type game. There are some others that I really like. I remember really liking the Ripley's Believe It or Not game, which I do not have up here. That allowed you to kind of bluff. That's a nice factor in it. Some of the things like National Geographic Global Pursuit. A lot of fun with the board and everything. Again, another one I don't have up here. But, you know, in the end, all these little tricks and stuff that add to the kind of maybe the interest of the game, they usually don't actually add to the pureness of the game. This is a very pure trivia game where you just need to know one thing. I like to think a little bit about it compared to Image. Image is a fun game in terms of a pure trivia game where you're working on a particular person, really, and you define them using cards that are attributes. It does have some problems, though, in terms of how it actually executes. It doesn't have the cleanness that this game has. This is just a purely clean game. And what about Scattergories? Well, Scattergories is designed for children. There's no question about it. It also has a much more limited choice ability. You draw a card and you're pretty much stuck with something. In fact, not only are you stuck with it, if I remember correctly, you roll a die to see which category within that card you get. Now, for advanced play, you could essentially play a Fact and 5 type game, but it would still be a simpler game because it doesn't cut things down to the same levels. But they are essentially the same game. For me, that means Scattergories is almost as good a game and kind of fun, but I hit it pretty hard for being totally derivative from what I think is actually a better game. You know, if it were sold as Fact and 5 for children, that would be fine, but it's not sold as that. It was sold as if it's this, you know, hey, this is the cool game, this is what we have. And no, it's not. It's some completely derived game that doesn't do as well. And to me, that's a hit. Avalon Hill put out something like that, Black Spy, which I think was kind of like Hearts. It was basically, well, why would I play this instead of Hearts? You know, what is the difference here? I don't mind if I buy a deck that's called Old Maid and I get Old Maid out of it, but I don't want to buy a game called Black Spy that's a sneaky spy game and pay $10 for it or whatever and end up with something that already, you know, essentially I could play with a $2 deck of cards or a 50-cent deck of cards if you get lucky enough to be able to find cards on sale. In this case, is it as bad? No, because Facts and 5 is long out of print by the time I think Scattergories actually came around. But still, it's disturbing. I really hate seeing games. A similar one, the old Avalon Hill Bismarck, got kind of reprinted, probably with no credits at all, by 3W as Sink the Bismarck, in a watered down version, to be honest. And that's how I feel about the Scattergories thing. Why water down a game when the original was pretty much perfection of the game?